I was fortunate enough to get this session, which is all about our new APIs. So I'm not a developer, so I thought, okay, well, we'll see how that one goes. And then I got the materials, and this was the first slide. So if anybody doesn't know, that's a sloth. And I thought, okay, they're really making this tough for me. So firstly, it's a session about APIs, and now it's a session about sloths, and what possible connection could there be between sloths and Liferay's APIs. So bear with me on this one. I'm going to try and draw the link. The first thing, of course, is that everybody thinks sloths are lazy, right? But the very word itself is used to denote laziness. So again, how does lazy relate to APIs? Well, it turns out that the author of this presentation is a real sloth fan, and they're actually efficiency champions. And what we mean by that is these guys just eat leaves, and there's not a lot of nutrient value in their leaves. So really what they have to do is be incredibly efficient in getting the nutrients out of the leaves that they're eating. And that is the segue into our APIs. Historically, developers have been able to be lazy, right? They've been able to build a single application. But over the last few years, we've seen this massive proliferation of different channels that need to be catered for. So in our initial implementations, we were working really just with websites. And as time went by, we introduced mobile apps, we introduced things like smartwatches, and so we needed to be able to develop applications for those as well. As time's moved on yet further, we now have this array of possible JavaScript frameworks that can be used for building web pages, they can be used for building apps, they can be used for building integrations with other technologies. And then if you extend that out further, we're now in a world where we might be building applications that integrate with bots, that talk to home appliances and voice automation. And the key thing here really is that the data and the services are the same. And really as developers, you're needing to become much more efficient in how you go about building the applications to make sure that you're not building the same solution time and time again just for a different channel. And Tim talked about that this morning in his opening keynote, is about this, the silos that exist in many organizations where you really are having you're building a completely different stack, you're building completely different applications, and you're doing that because you need to service all of these different channels. I'll actually pause there for a second and go back to a question that we had during the NOAA session, which was around mobile support. Obviously, this session is really about supporting APIs, and one of the key use cases for those is mobile. We have had some technologies to support mobile applications for a number of years. We already talked about the fact that Liferay has responsive web design out of the box and has done for many years. We then introduced capabilities, we call them Liferay screens, which essentially let you jumpstart mobile development by having pre-built screenlets, very much like the widgets or the portlets that you would have used in Liferay. But what we're seeing is definitely a shift from the developer perspective into relying not so much on toolkits for building native apps, but actually making use of the APIs that are available, and then making use of the frameworks that are able to sit on top of those APIs. And that's very much the direction that we're going in with Liferay. So this session is talking about headless. Now, headless is an interesting one. I'm personally fairly cynical about a lot of the headless use cases. And the most common use case that people talk about is as a headless CMS. And one of the real challenges with the concept of a headless CMS, and in its purest form, what we're talking about is a content management system that provides an administration interface for authoring content, but that has no presentation layer. And in my view, at least, one of the biggest challenges here is that most of those applications still require some sort of web front end. And if you have a pure headless CMS, then you're actually having to build that front end from scratch. There are other use cases. Corbin talked in the last session about the APIs available for commerce, and there's definitely examples where headless commerce is becoming more prevalent. As I said, the headless platform, the true headless platform, is providing those back-end capabilities but no UI, and access to that content is purely via API. In Liferay's world, we actually kind of think there's a better way of dealing with this. There's a hybrid way of dealing with this. So we have our traditional approach. We have our Liferay application, which has its content management system, it has its presentation layers, and we think that's very valuable in a lot of use cases. So what we want to do is complement that traditional approach with a headless approach by making it possible to do anything that you could do through the native UI of Liferay, the browser UI of Liferay, able to be done through the APIs as well. And we call that mode decoupled. And that's very much a buzzword that you're going to see Liferay talking about a lot over the next few years. It's the ability to use Liferay in its traditional form and at the same time make use of the same content, the same data, the same systems that are integrated through Liferay, but using different channels of interaction for your end users. And there are a number of different scenarios, different ways of thinking about how you can use headless or decoupled. The first one is that classic example where you don't have a UI. You build that UI from scratch using something like Angular or Node or React or any of the popular JavaScript frameworks. And that's most definitely available for you. And we definitely expect that will be an approach used for, particularly for mobile apps. Again, I tend to think that if you're building a website or a solution that requires a web front end, that you're better off using our out-of-the-box capabilities than starting from scratch. The middle one is probably the most interesting, which is the development of applications that don't have a traditional UI. The examples here are things like using a bot. We had an example that we built out last year, which actually took a form that was defined in Liferay and for making a claim on a motor vehicle insurance policy, and it integrated it with a chatbot. So on your phone, you could simply talk to the chatbot, and you could provide the answers to the questions, and then the chatbot simply filled in the fields of the form as you submitted it. And we'll talk about a couple of other examples that kind of follow that line to do with those other types of appliances, to do with voice automation, home automation, and so on. And then the other scenario, or the third scenario that we're looking to address, is where you might actually do full platform administration through the APIs. So Liferay's had APIs for many years, and they've really been focused around retrieving content or retrieving information. The new family of APIs that we're building initially focuses around that content delivery as well, but over time we'll be introducing APIs that stretch across the entire platform, from the end-to-end perspective in terms of creating sites, creating users, the full administration of the platform being done through APIs. So that could get you to a situation where you might want to do a management of Liferay entirely through a command line console, but also very much then supports integration with other platforms. Again, Corbin talked about our integrations with MuleSoft and Talend, which have been developed primarily for commerce, but are able to be used across the system. And then also there are many scenarios where you might want to retrieve information from Liferay and have it presented through line of business applications like Salesforce or SAP. And again, the APIs that we're developing will support that. So we're not just talking about content retrieval, we are talking about the full array of operations that you can carry out with Liferay. In terms of the API options that are available to you with 7.2, the first is our traditional JSON WS APIs. I'm not going to talk about those in this session. We've had those for a number of years. They still exist. We'll continue to support them. But we very much believe that they'll be superseded by our new family of REST APIs. And one of the primary reasons for that is that all of our new APIs are based around the OpenAPI version 3 standard. So these are very much standards-based. They're accessible, they're testable, they're documented, they're much more easy to use, they provide much more capabilities than our traditional APIs do. And then most recently of all, we've added support as well for GraphQL. So now as a developer, you have a number of different approaches that you can choose to build your applications in a way that's most suitable for the use case that you have and for the development skills that you have. For those that are not familiar with OpenAPI, it's a very widely used standard for defining API specifications. It was originally called Swagger and then was made an open standard more recently. As an OpenAPI standard, there are a lot of tools available to you for testing those APIs, for building clients for them, and many, many products and platforms already exist on the market that provide out-of-the-box support for OpenAPI. As I said, originally known as Swagger, all of the APIs are fully documented and are testable through Swagger Hub. So if you just Google Liferay Swagger Hub, you'll find all of our APIs published. You can see all of the methods that are available to you, all of the properties that they take, so on and so forth. And recently, Liferay actually became a member of the OpenAPI initiative. So we're very much invested in this set of standards and these capabilities. In terms of what the APIs offer from a feature perspective, They all follow a very uniform standard. So we have developed a new internal tool for our engineering teams to use called REST Builder. And each of the engineering teams is using REST Builder to build the scaffolding for their APIs and then to complete the APIs for their individual functional areas. REST Builder will be made available for you to use so that you can actually use it to develop custom APIs on top of Liferay as well. All of our open APIs will support capabilities like filtering and sorting in collections. They support pagination automatically. They support the ability to get the API to give you just the information you want back from it, as opposed to it just giving you everything that it might be able to retrieve. And certainly in terms of the traditional APIs that we've had, a couple of the major advantages are not only can you get access to the raw data of the content or the information that you're receiving, but we'll also give you back rendered data. So if you've got a web content article with a presentation template available to it, you can ask the API to give you the article back in the context of that presentation template, and then what you'll get back is HTML that you can render immediately on a page. At the same time, we'll give you localized content. So again, there was a question earlier on about language support in Liferay. So that kind of works in two ways. We provide support for all of the system user interfaces, the administration console, and so on. All of those strings are available in about 13 languages out of the box. And then we give you the ability to localize the platform into any language you want. And similarly, we give you the ability to localize the sites and the content and the data that you store in Liferay into any language that you want. We don't do the actual translation of that, but we'll give you the ability to store a translated variant or translated variants of pretty much everything that you can define in Liferay. And then through the default out-of-the-box web UI, Liferay will automatically serve up localized content based on your locale settings as a user, and the same thing also applies with our new APIs. So if you have a use case that requires multiple language variants of content, your new APIs will work for you as well. And then the final point on here is that we also make use of authentication. So not only are you getting back the content that's localized, but you're also only getting back the content and information that a user is authorized to see, and also only allowing them to perform the actions on it that they're authorized to perform based on their permissions. In terms of GraphQL, so another alternative approach for getting access to our APIs. So I knew nothing about GraphQL when I was assigned this presentation, so I thought I'd do a bit of research. GraphQL was actually developed by Facebook, and what it provides is an ability to ask for information using a structured object format. So most of us, or a lot of us, well, certainly I'm familiar with SQL, so there's an example there of how an SQL query might look and what its equivalent version in GraphQL might look like. So essentially, if I wanted to get back name and date of birth from a user object, I can do that with that very simple object structure. The key benefits for developers are there is a single endpoint for all of the GraphQL APIs for Liferay. You simply go to one location, and then everything is documented, and you as a developer can step through all of the available APIs. Another big advantage is that these APIs can return aggregated sets of results. So you can actually query across multiple objects at the same time and then get back an aggregated set of information from Liferay. And indeed, if you were building your own GraphQL APIs with our REST Builder tool, you could even have these APIs returning information from multiple systems in a single API call. So you get all the benefits of the open APIs as well. You get the same pagination, the filtering, the ordering capabilities, and they're all built off the same open API specifications. Okay, so that was kind of like what we have in the platform, and then we wanted to follow on with a couple of examples of how you might use these APIs in action. So here is our scenario here. This is Ryuvo cars. Nobody will possibly guess the brand that we may have borrowed this from. If you don't guess it from here, you'll definitely guess it from the videos that come up later on. This is a large multinational vehicle manufacturer. They obviously have a lot of challenges from a digital perspective in terms of presentation of information through their website, the ability for users to browse their content through mobile apps, and they also have the requirements to manage service operations, so allowing customers to book services for their cars, to take out rental cars in the event of them booking out a service. So their traditional approach obviously has been very much driven around the web. but they're really looking at enhancing their operations and making better use of what digital can offer them. So some of their problems are modern customers demand emotionally engaging digital experiences. So this is not anything that is unique to this particular organization. They really do need the same content and data to be available across multiple channels, and they don't want to invest in that multiple silo, multiple technology stack approach. And they also need the content and the experience to be maintained by non-developers. And this is one of the key sort of elements that we're seeing in modern implementation, recent implementations of Liferay, and Jacques talked to this morning, which is you can't rely on the IT organization being present to build everything. In order to be as agile as you need to be in today's economy, you've got to have content being refreshed on a regular basis. It can't be raise a change request, get it logged with IT, wait 3 months for them to review it, wait 3 more months for it to get implemented. It's got to be done dynamically in real time. Tim talked about changes being made daily or more frequently than that. And that means that you need to engage with non-technical users to author, publish, and maintain content and experiences. One of the things that Ryuva is looking at working on is kind of these kiosk-based experiences. And one of their challenges is that there's always this kind of scope creep, there's changing requirements from these. So here's an example of a classic kind of kiosk, touch screen. You can browse through. You've probably seen them in shopping malls where you can find where the nearest store is and so on. And yet these things are often changing. So here's a different requirement, same sort of concept. In this example, you've got a ability to get a photo with your favorite sports stars, and you can actually select the players that you want involved in the photo, and then you'll stand back and you'll actually digitally insert the players that you've selected into the picture that you take. So a pretty cool piece of technology, but just kind of reflecting the way that these experiences are evolving, the way that these experiences become more emotionally engaging as time goes by. So how does Ryuva go about dealing with these evolving requirements? Well, firstly, they need to make sure that they can easily change published content. And in order to be able to do that, they need powerful content creation tools. Fortunately, Liferay DXP has a lot of those content creation tools. They also need APIs to be able to pull that content because they want to build these experiences that are not traditionally based around websites, but around those type of kiosk experiences and so on. They want to be able to personalize content to an individual user. So what they realize is that whilst they might have a generic experience for someone walking into a showroom who's wanting to see on the kiosk just all of the cars that are available, that they might actually want to extend that and provide personalization so that an individual user can select or be identified and actually then be presented with information that's more relevant to their requirements. So for that, we're making use of Liferay's content sets capability. So content sets were introduced in 7.2. If any of you have used Asset Publisher before, effectively you've used the same sort of configuration, which is you define either a manually selected set of content or a dynamically selected set of content that is then presented in the page. With content sets, what we've done is we've separated that configuration from the Asset Publisher and made it available to be used through APIs as well. So what we can do is say, we define a content set called all cars, and that will have within it all of the content that relates to cars. Anytime any author creates a new content article related to a car, that automatically becomes a member of that content set. And then we can also do segmentation of content sets based on the user profile. And then the third approach for dealing with our evolving requirements is to be able to publish the same information irrespective of whether it's through a website, through an application, through a link, through a kiosk, and so on. And again, what we're going to make use of here is the content sets, the fact that they're reusable, and using the APIs to be able to pull that content from the Liferay backend. So because it's a sloth presentation, there's another picture of a sloth. I'm not going to talk any more about sloths, but we'll use this as a segue into a quick video that demonstrates some of the possible capabilities. So this is our kiosk scenario. And actually what we're using here are our GraphQL APIs. Yeah, sorry, this one wasn't so well edited. You can clearly make out which brand we were talking about, but never mind. So starting the video off, let's try that again. So starting the video off, we're sitting inside a normal Liferay DXP environment. So all of the content authoring, all of the web presentation is available here as if you were, as if a standard Liferay implementation. Within our content management system, we're making use of content sets, and we've defined one content set. Essentially what we're saying is bring in all of the car web content articles, and every time a new content article is added, it will be added to this content set. So now here's my kiosk view. My users arrived in the showroom. We're just browsing through the different cars that Ryuvo has. We can click on or tap on the screen and be presented with some information on each of those cars. So again, just pulling that Liferay web content information. The next thing what we've implemented here is some face recognition. So what will happen in a second is our user will click on Find Better Cars. We'll pop up with a little webcam. There's our user, that's Javier, one of our engineers. And you'll see that now what's happened is we've done some face recognition. We now have cars that are more appropriate for someone like Javier, who is young. And interestingly, if you looked at the picture, he's pretty clearly male. Our face recognition only has actually determined that he's about 90% male. So I'm not entirely sure what that says about the AI. But you'll see what's happened is that has dynamically changed the query that's pulled the information out of the back end. And what it actually did was it switched to a personalized variant called the young segment. So instead of just presenting the general set of information for all users, it's now identified that our user is below a certain age as defined by that segment. And to add content to that segment, all I need to do is select the cheap tag against my web content. I can then publish a change to that content, refresh the app, and now here's my new variant of Ryuvo's cars. Now, in the original recording of this video, this went on and showed you all of the code. And I kind of figured that A, I didn't want to explain the code, and B, you probably wouldn't be that interested in the code that's sitting behind there. But if anyone is interested, please come and grab me at the end, and we can share the full version with you. The other idea that Ryuvo came up with was, what about a completely new experience? Instead of having to come into a service center and book an appointment or get on the telephone, what if you were able to integrate the Ryuvo application with a voice recognition, voice assistant like Amazon Echo, a device that's sitting in the corner of the house and you can just talk to. And so for this, we used our new REST APIs, and we have a second scenario. So this is the same Liferay system. It's the same content coming out of that Liferay system, but it's using instead our REST APIs and an integration with Amazon Alexa. So hopefully the sound is on.
Alexa, Service Center.
What I'm really impressed about this is our user is Spanish, and his English is so good that the voice assistant can recognize it.
What do you want to do?
Set up an appointment.
Oh, I hope your car is okay. 7 o'clock is fine?
Yes.
Okay, I've created an appointment. Do you want a courtesy car?
Esto detrás lo que está haciendo es interactuar con nuestras APIs REST.
Okay, so for those of you that don't speak Spanish, which includes me, what Javier is saying here is that at this point, so most of the integration so far has just been with Alexa. She's asking the questions and collecting the answers. But now what's happened is that she's actually created an appointment, which is a piece of content which is now defined and stored in Liferay. And we'll come back to that in a second.
Lo que está haciendo es interactuar con nuestras APIs REST de nuestro Liferay portal y crear una cita que está modelado como otro structure content. Yes, please.
You can rent one of the following cars: Ryuvo Cerulean GT, Ryuvo Cerulean XL, Ryuvo Target 2019, Ryuvo Speedmax CF.
So here what's happened is that we've actually called out back to the Liferay system, and we've used one of our content sets to retrieve the available cars that are there for rental purposes. And now what we'll see is that when Javier asks for a particular car, that we'll actually be able to get information from that content on the car itself. If I hadn't skipped the video.
You can rent one of the following cars: Ryuvo Cerulean GT, Ryuvo Cerulean XL, Ryuvo Target 2019, Ryuvo Speedmax CF.
Esta petición ha consultado el listado de nuestro content set y les ha enumerado. More info about the target.
This car is make it an expression of yourself. With 10 exterior color options, all yours from the inside out. Do you want to rent this car?
Yes, rent the target.
Are you sure you want to rent Target?
Yes.
Okay. I've added the request to the appointment. See you there.
Y aquí hemos terminado la interacción, actualizando el contenido que hemos creado y apuntando el coche que hemos.
So you see what happened is that we had an appointment created within the Liferay system, and then when Javier selected that he wanted to book the target, the system has now updated that. So a relatively simple integration, but a really different experience, a much more engaging experience for the user. They're just sitting on the sofa in the lounge, and they've just asked Alexa to sort out their booking and rented a replacement to their car. In terms of where we're going with the capabilities of our new headless APIs, in addition to creating additional APIs for the entire product platform, we'll be exposing to the developer the user permissions that are available. So obviously within Liferay, users might have a permission to read an article, to update it, to create new ones, to delete them, and so on. We want to make that available to the developer so they can see very easily when, or they can code very easily against the information that the APIs provide back based on what the user's allowed to do. We're also looking at providing support for versioned content so that even a developer might be able to get whatever version of a content article they might want to retrieve, and potentially also looking at draft content so that you might actually be able to, you might have a scenario where you want somebody using a non-Liferay tool to actually be able to approve and publish a draft content article. And then looking at support for batch import and export of content. And that's something that, again, has come out of the commerce world, where it's very important a lot of the time to be able to import large data sets. From the developer side, we'll be providing the REST Builder tool to the customers and partners so that you can use that tool to develop your own custom APIs. And further to that, we'll also be providing extensibility capabilities, so you'll actually be able to take our APIs and extend them to perform exactly the features that you need within your own development environments. And that was all I had. I'm sorry there's no more pictures of sloths, but thank you very much.